For some reason, I'm at full screen and I can't get to my notes. Is that a function of the agenda being up?
Possibly. Hello, people are coming in. Sorry, I hit broadcast before.
That's okay. Zay, so if you hit view options up top, there's a drop down that says exit full screen. Does that work for you?
Options, I'm sorry, where is that?
That's okay. It says view options at the very top.
The very
Very top of the screen. Yeah.
In the center, maybe?
You are viewing the shelf right there.
I see it, I see it.
Or if you hit escape, sometimes that'll get you out too.
Exit full screen, got it, thank you.
Yep. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Sorry, we were having a few technical difficulties as we got going tonight, but I see we have folks coming into our broadcast. So welcome, everybody. I'm going to give us just a minute, not even a minute, just a few more seconds to have everybody who's attending trickle in. While we're waiting for the last folks, I am going to send out a chat to everybody. This chat includes 2 links. It's both the agenda for this evening's meeting, which you should be able to see right now on your screen, as well as the biographies for our panelists. So feel free, I know those links are safe. I put them in there myself. Feel free to click on those if you would like to view those on your own. I'm only gonna show the agenda for the little bit, this here at the beginning. So if you wanna check that out, you have that link. So I think we have everybody in here that had said they were coming, or at least as they trickle in. So we're gonna go ahead and get it started. My name is Michelle Bird. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here this evening. I am the Public Affairs Director for Larimer County. But tonight I'm going to be your Zoom host. So that kind of means I'm a little bit of IT, and I'm a little bit of a moderator, and I'm a little bit of a timekeeper. But one thing I am not is a criminal justice expert. That is why our panelists are here tonight. They're kind of the stars of the show, and they'll be walking you through juvenile service programs here this evening. Thank you, Bobby Joe. We had some dogs barking in the background. Everybody loves dogs. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about our panelists. They're all part of the Criminal Justice Advisory Committee. And this committee is an advisory and policy level board that consists of county elected officials and other principal justice system decision makers. So this includes judges, prosecutors, public defenders, probation and parole officials, alternative sentencing and community corrections service providers, police, other first responders, human services, behavioral health, and juvenile service providers. And tonight, as you guys know, we are here to focus on the juvenile service providers. The mission of CJAC is to participate in a structured policy planning process that addresses issues facing the county's criminal justice system, and the committee sets priorities, develops and executes policy decisions, and strives to ensure an accountable and coordinated justice system in Larimer County. And I think what's really unique about this group is they all come from different parts of the criminal justice system. It's not just officials from Larimer County. It's not just officials from our police force. It's everybody across the board. And they're working together as a team to provide the best services for the residents in our community. So we're excited to have them tonight. And before we kind of dive into the meat of our presentation tonight, I want to go over just a few things. This is intended to be an interactive session. So we are going to spend some time, our panelists are going to talk about their passions, what they do every day and how that impacts our community. But after that, we are going to get into a Q&A is when you guys jump in. Zoom webinar format that we're using tonight might be a little bit different than the Zoom meetings you've all participated in the past. You'll notice that there's not the chat box feature. You're not allowed to chat out to the rest of the attendees. Instead, there's a Q&A function. And the reason we use this feature, it's really a safety reason. Primarily, it's so that we can open it up to all attendees, but I don't have to be worried that someone with bad intentions comes in and sends out a link to all attendees that will infect everybody's computer with a virus or ransomware or something like that. Or that they'll send out a link to a page that no one wants to go to, or that you'll notice that you'll just see the screens tonight of our panelists. You won't see the screens of the rest of the participants. And that too is so that someone doesn't use their screen as an opportunity to share something inappropriate with us all this evening. So it's truly just a safety function. But we still have opportunities to participate, and I hope you all are excited about that. There's a few different ways. First, you should notice if you're using the Zoom app, either on your phone, on a tablet, or if you're using it on your web browser, there's a raise hand button that you can click. If you click on that, what it does is it indicates to me that you would like to ask a question live. And when we get to that portion of the evening and I see you have your hand raised, I'll go ahead and give you the ability to ask, or you'll have the ability to speak, and you'll notice that a mute unmute button pops up at that time. You'll have to unmute yourself and you'll be able to speak. If you called in, I don't see that we have any callers at the moment, but just in case I don't see something, callers can also participate by dialing *9, and that'll raise your hand and let me know that you're gonna speak. Again, there's that Q&A box. So that's kind of a really important part of this too, is we're gonna go through some presentations before we get to Q&A. So you might have questions as we go. Go ahead and type your questions into that Q&A box so you don't forget them. That way we know what questions you guys are wanting to ask, and we'll get to that at the end. The bad part about webinar is that without that chat, we don't kind of have that option for running dialogue, which is a bummer, and we don't want anyone to think that we're trying to suppress your voice. So if you would like to leave comments, maybe you don't have a question, but you have a comment about something, go ahead and just put it in that Q&A function and I'll make it live right away so that we have that ability to have that kind of running commentary from our participants as well. As I said earlier, we're gonna have our panelists talk about their programs before we get to Q&A. So again, don't forget to ask those questions in the Q&A box as we go along. If we're not able to get to everyone's questions tonight, that's okay. We actually have an ability with the Zoom webinar it'll keep those questions, and I'll be able to produce a report that lets us know what questions we didn't get to, and it'll give us your email address, and we'll make sure that we get back to you with the answers to your questions. But hopefully we can get to everyone's question, but if we don't, I want you guys to know that we are gonna still get to your question just at a later time. So with that, I would like to introduce Magistrate Zoe to give some opening remarks about this evening's event.
All right, thank you. Good evening. My name is Matthew Zay. I'd like to begin by thanking Emily Humphrey and Michelle Bird for organizing this panel event on juvenile justice. I would also like to thank you all for attending this event and for caring about how juvenile justice services are administered in Larimer County. I am currently the magistrate presiding over the juvenile justice docket, ICUs who have been officially charged with criminal offenses, and I preside over their cases through to resolution, which may be to adjudication and sentencing, or which may be to dismissal or a not guilty verdict. I also preside over the Juvenile Recovery Court, which is a specialized program for youth with substance use issues, and I'll spend more time talking about that later. Tonight, we wanted to spend some time talking with you to introduce you to the agency partners that are responsible for serving youths who are in trouble with the law in Larimer County, and to share with you information about the services that these agencies provide. For youths who are in this kind of trouble and their family, they may find their involvement in the juvenile justice system to be anxiety-provoking and overwhelming. They may find the processes and agencies involved mysterious and intimidating. For community members who are not directly involved but have an interest in juvenile justice, as victims perhaps, or as taxpayers, business owners, or community organizers who want to know that their community is safe and that the system is effective and fair, they may want transparency about how and when services are administered, and they may be looking for reassurances that the agencies responsible for these services are adhering to the highest standards and the best practices. We are hoping that the information we provide and the questions we can answer for you today will help you find confidence and reassurance in the responses available in Larimer County regarding juvenile justice. We are very fortunate as a county to have amazingly qualified, committed, and skilled professionals looking out for youths and their families in ways that are caring, innovative, and responsive to specific needs. The county is blessed to have agencies who see the juvenile justice system as a team effort, who work together to keep each other informed and to share ideas and resources. The result is a system for Larimer County that is focused on helping youths and their families thrive in the community and find success in the system. We strive to minimize the extent and depth to which youths and families must participate in the system. In determining what that participation should look like, we strive to be responsive to individualized needs and risks that youths and their families may be expressing. We strive to find safe and innovative alternatives to detention in serious cases, and we strive to ensure that community safety is not compromised during this process. It is with pleasure and appreciation that I now turn the focus over to these dedicated individuals. They and their agencies do the hard work in the field, turning these aspirations for our system into a reality for the youth, families, and communities that we serve, and they can tell you directly their part in accomplishing these aspirations.
Thank you so much, Magistrate Zay. So quickly before we jump into our presentations, I'd like to do introductions of the rest of our panelists, just so you know whose faces you're looking at before we jump into our presentations. So I am going to call out their name, and then I ask that they give us their full name, what they do, and how they participate in the juvenile services programs. So with that, we are going to start with Jared.
Hey everybody, thanks for being here tonight. I am Jared Sargent. I am a corporal with Fort Collins Police Services, and I work under the School Resource Officer Program that covers all the schools that are in incorporated Fort Collins and Larimer County. Our role really is in working with the schools, and that means working with students, staff, administrators in our schools to basically keep the schools safe and connect students. Right now, I'm covering almost all the schools during remote learning. And I've been in the unit. This is now my 7th year. Before I was a corporal over schools on the west side. I was at Poudre High School as well.
Thank you, Jared. Bobby Joe, you're up next. Oh, we can't hear you. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
I'm kind of new to Zoom meetings. So hi everyone, I'm Bobby Pastecki. I'm a police officer for the Loveland Police Department. And I've been there for 26 years, and right now I'm currently assigned to our School Resource Officer Program. And I, right now, have only one middle school, Walt Clark Middle School. Before that, I was shared and had a couple of middle schools, and then even covered a high school. And so my involvement is just being at the schools and being a resource to them and the kids.
Thank you so much. Kristen, you're up next. Well, Kristen seems, we might have lost Kristen, so we will come back to Kristen and let's move on to Bob. Bob, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bob Pursfield. I'm the Chief Deputy District Attorney, currently over the Juvenile Division at the District Attorney's Office. I've been there for almost 13 years. I've had experience in working with juveniles for the better part of 22 years in numerous aspects. I was a social worker before I went to law school. I did divorce and custody cases as private practice. When I got out of law school for about a year, I served as the Deputy District Attorney in the Juvenile Court here for about 3.5 years. And so a lot of experience there, and I'm on many of the panels and boards that deal with the juveniles in our jurisdiction, in our state. So.
Thank you so much, Bob. How about we move on to Carrie?
All right, good evening, everyone. So my name is Carrie Bielemberg. I work here at the District Attorney's Office as well. I supervise our diversion programs in the District Attorney's Office. So you'll learn more about what that even means, but we operate diversion out of our District Attorney's Office, which looks a little bit different than some other jurisdictions in the state of Colorado. So I supervise those programs, and I also work directly with youth, screening them for diversion and seeing if they're appropriate, and then laying out what requirements they might have to successfully resolve their cases outside of court. I've been with the District Attorney's Office for about 3.5 years now, but I've worked in this community in Northern Colorado with youth and families for the past 9 years, anywhere from locked facilities through the Division of Youth Services all the way down to nonprofits and school-based mentoring. pretty wide range of experience, but I'm happy to be where I am and working with diversion. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Carrie. How about Heather?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Heather Siegel, and I am an attorney with the Public Defender's Office. So I'm a licensed attorney. I also have a background in social work. So I have worked a lot over the years with juveniles and adults, focusing on criminal defense work. So I've been with the Public Defender's Office for 9 years, and throughout that time, I've been in and out of the juvenile court for about 6 of those years. I currently am not with the juvenile court, but I do still jump in and help out pretty frequently with the attorneys who are in there. So my job, criminal defense work, and I think Jeff Schwartz will talk a little bit more also about what we do as defenders.
Thank you so much, Heather. Speaking of Jeff Schwartz, Jeff, you're up.
Hello, welcome. My name is Jeff Schwartz. I am a private defense attorney. My background is that I was a public defender in Colorado Springs for 7 years before I came to Fort Collins. And during that time in Colorado Springs, I spent several years in the juvenile courts in that jurisdiction. In addition to my private practice, I'm what's called an ADC attorney, or an alternate defense counsel. And if there is a conflict for some reason, be it a witness conflict or a co-defendant conflict with the Public Defender's Office, I'm one of 3 ADC attorneys assigned to the juvenile division. So much like Ms. Siegel, I represent a lot of indigent juvenile defenders, as well as adults. And so we work very closely with all of the people on this panel to do what's in the best interest of the juveniles.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Tracy, you're up.
Good evening. My name is Tracy Stromberg. I am one of the juvenile probation supervisors here in Fort Collins. I've been with the state of Colorado for going on 13 years now. The majority of my career I spent as an officer working with juveniles, and now I have the pleasure of supervising all of our juvenile officers.
Thank you, Tracy. Ava, you're up.
Hello, everybody. Welcome this evening. We really appreciate your interest in this topic. My name is Hava Simmons, and I'm a supervisor for Larimer County Department of Human Services, specifically Children, Youth, and Families. I supervise a unit called Family Partnerships, and we work exclusively with adolescents in the delinquency system, which is unusual throughout the state, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. I also I also chair the Juvenile Services Planning Committee, which is comprised of many of the people you see here, as well as others. And it is an opportunity for all of us to get together who have a passion for juveniles involved in the delinquency system and talk about how we want to prioritize funding and get services and supports to our youth and families in the community. And I've served in some capacity in child welfare and juvenile justice for over 20 years. I'm a proud graduate of Colorado State, so I've been in several places throughout the country, but I'm back here again. So thank you again for attending this evening.
Thank you, Hava. All right, Zoe, you are up.
Hi, hello. My name is Zoe Trigget. I am a former Poudre High School Impala, and I am in my 2nd year currently at CU Boulder. You guys will hear a little bit more about my story and the story of someone else that I will be speaking on the behalf of later tonight.
Thank you, Zoe. And it looks like we have Kristen back. So Kristen, if you can just give us a brief introduction. Thank you.
Yes, so sorry for that. The joy of Zoom meetings and working from home. I lost my internet connection there for a brief moment. But my name is Kristen Cochran Ward, and I am the Director of Mental Health and Substance Use Connections with the Health District of Northern Larimer County. And I also supervise our CAYAC program. And CAYAC means Child, Adolescent, and Young Adult Connections. So I'm glad to be here and look forward to telling you all about what we have to offer as well.
Thank you, Kristen. So with that, and of course, Magistrate Zay already introduced himself, so I didn't want to leave him out. And we're going to get into the meat of our event tonight. So I'm going to ask my panelists, if they are not presenting, to turn their camera off, because sometimes cameras can be a little bit of a distraction for the person or for the attendees when someone else is speaking. So we're just going to have the camera on of the panelist that's speaking at the moment. Once we get through the presentations, we'll bring them all back for the Q&A. And just a reminder to our panelists, and just so the attendees know, I am the timekeeper tonight. So you may hear me chiming in. All of these individuals are very passionate about what they do. And it's very easy to think you're only 5 minutes in about something you care about so much, and then you're 15 minutes in actually. So I'm here to keep time, make sure that we're able to spend enough time on Q&A tonight. So you may hear me chiming in to keep my panelists going, and I'll also introduce the next panelists. So with that being said, our first panelists are going to be our SROs, so our school resource officers. And Jared is going to be our first one to go. So Jared, you are up.
Thanks again for having me. Glad you mentioned SROs, because I think people hear SRO and aren't certain what that means, school resource officer. But I'm going to say SRO for the majority of my presentation to keep it clear. So I've been an SRO for 7 years, 2 of those as a corporal. And I think where I like to start this conversation is about what we do on the front end in schools. Most of what we do is really a resource to students, to teachers, to staff, administrators, while we're in the schools, and helping out people when things come up. A lot of times we have kids that will come to us and need connections, and that might mean connecting with their counselor, connecting with teachers, or connecting with outside resources. We also teach. We teach classes, we teach administrators, and then we also teach outside of the schools. So we do a lot of different things while we're in the schools, helping kids out on the front end outside of just the criminal justice world. At the end of the day, I think safety in schools is one of our top priorities. And so that ultimately is probably the most important thing that we engage in. But there's so many other things that we do in the schools other than just the law enforcement piece and the criminal piece. Start talking about the criminal aspect. There are a lot of things that we do in the schools to try and limit kids to being charged. We have the luxury of being able to do direct referrals in our community, and we have community outreach programs that we work with directly in order to keep kids from entering the criminal justice system or finding resources they're just not getting in the schools. We work a lot in Poudre School District with the Center for Family Outreach, kids who have substance abuse, kids who are having an issue in schools, kids who are having issues at home. And we're oftentimes able to do a direct referral when we see that there's a need before it ever gets to a criminal level. There's also restorative justice that we can use for things that we might be able to charge criminally. But again, we can do a direct referral to restorative justice or restore without having to put kids into the juvenile justice system. And we use those, we work directly with those programs quite a bit. We also work with programs like CAYAC, which is going to be a mental health support for kids outside of the schools when the supports in schools just are not sufficient. When we look at situations where there is a crime that occurred and we have to decide on whether or not to issue a kid into juvenile summons, it looks a couple of different ways. I will tell you, when the decision is made to charge a juvenile with a crime, there are a couple ways of doing that. The most common way, and I would say it's 99% of the time, we will issue a juvenile summons, release the student to their parents or to a guardian, and then have them meet in court on a court date about usually 3 to 4 weeks out. Very rarely we'll have crimes that occur that a child is required to be arrested. And those are going to be our most violent crimes, weapons offenses, possibly sex assaults or domestic violence. And those ones might result in an arrest, but the vast majority, when we're going to charge a juvenile into criminal justice system, into the courts, it's going to be released to parents with a juvenile summons. So an actual arrest is something we rarely do. Even at a really busy high school, it was not a very frequent thing for me to do. When thinking about whether or not a kid is going to be charged, we have to consider a lot of factors. The first thing is going to be the severity of the crime. And I mentioned some criminal offenses require a juvenile be detained. And then there is additional steps to determine if that kid is actually going to be placed in a facility or not. So certain weapons offenses, and again, domestic violence, So severity of the crime is going to be one of the first things we think about when we're determining on whether we're going to charge or whether we're going to arrest. Part of that as well is going to be victims, and victims are going to have a say in every situation. There are certain laws that protect victims that are cover them. So third degree assault is one. Domestic violence with harassment could be one. Posting private images. There's a slew of different crimes that fall under victims' rights that victims are covered. And at the end of the day, they have a say on what our decision is going to be. So oftentimes when we're trying to decide on whether we're going to charge, victims are going to have the biggest say in that decision as well. One thing I think surprises people a lot when I talk about this other consideration is family considerations. Oftentimes when I have a situation, there's a crime and it might be a minor crime. I talk to the parents and see how things are going. Times maybe their kids are skipping class, starting to abuse substances, and becoming really difficult to manage at home. And there have been times where I've contacted parents and asked them, what do you want to see out of this? And they're at their wits' end. And utilizing the justice system is really a way to get these parents, these families, and these kids support that they're not going to get otherwise. And so there are times where we'll contact families and they will ask us specifically to charge just to get that extra accountability, and then also to start getting some of those supports that they just don't have in place at that time. And so that's certainly a consideration. Those are the big factors in whether we issue a juvenile summons or charge a juvenile with a crime. That's pretty much all I have on my end.
Thank you so much, Jared. All right, I think we want to go to our other SRO, school resource officer. So Bobby, you are up.
Okay, hi again, guys. I really kind of have to ride on the coattails of what Jared had to say. He explained it really well. Thompson School District works pretty closely like Pooter in that we have the same services and things like that. And for me, I've been in the schools now, I think it's about 11 years, you know, in between middle schools and covering a high school for 1 year. And it was kind of, for me, the last resort to issue a summons. In instances, I try to work alongside with the administrations and start at lower levels and try to handle the, you know, through restorative justice, mediation, other counseling services, things like that, try to handle it that way. And then if those steps don't work, then sometimes the summons is appropriate. I've had parents that have asked me to charge their kids with a crime. And like Jared had said, it's to get them that accountability piece and also to get them some services at home that maybe that they weren't getting. I've gotten kind of creative in my years of doing this, and I've worked alongside with our DA in Loveland, and have even issued like written a ticket out for a kid but didn't serve it and kind of had it as a deferred summons. And as long as that person we set forth, you know, you don't get into trouble or anything like that for the remainder of 6 months, 3 months, whatever it was, I'd give them the opportunity to tear the summons up as well. So just trying to, you know, help the kiddos is the bottom line goal, and whatever that means to help them, reach them, to get them services and try to correct behavior before it becomes a problem when they start turning 18. Other than that, I really don't have anything to add. We have the Center for Family Outreach. We work through Summit, Stone, and Loveland for our mental health, our co-responders. Everything is pretty close to what Jared said. So I think that's all I've got to add.
Thank you so much, Bobby. And thank you, Jared, as well. And thank you for the service you provide to our students and our schools. I want to remind everybody before we move on to our next panelists about you can type in your questions as they come up. So if you have any questions for Jared or Bobby, go ahead and put that in the Q&A section, and we'll get to those afterwards. And if you have other questions that come up while our other presenters are presenting, please feel free to get those questions in there. We've heard a lot already, the term kayak. So I think that leads into our next panelist, who is Kristen. Kristen, tell us what kayak stands for, and go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you so much for having me here. I'm thrilled to be able to share a little bit about our program and the resources that are available in the community. So CAYAC stands for Child, Adolescent, and Young Adult Connections. CAYAC is a partnership between the Health District of Northern Larimer County and Summit Stone Health Partners. So just a little bit of a history. CAYAC was a grant-funded program that started approximately 4 years ago. And what it was based on was a huge community initiative and partnership between over 20 different agencies back in 2010. In 2010, all of these agencies got together and said, if we had a magic wand and had all the money in the world and we could create the service that is missing in our community, what would it be? What would it look like? And how could we serve families that are desperate for help? So unfortunately, back in 2010, we weren't able to secure funding for such a program, so it got put on a shelf. Well, in 2016, we got a grant and we pulled that magic blueprint off the shelf and said, we're going to make this a reality for our community. And that's exactly what we did. The goal of CAYAC is really to fill the gaps for services in the community. I just want to say and acknowledge how many amazing services we have and how much is already being done in our community. We are very, very fortunate for the services that we have. And with that said, it's still not enough. There are still gaps, there are still holes, there are still missing pieces that we really wish we could fill. So CAYAC is just a very small part of that, and I am happy to tell you all about that service. So what CAYAC does is we work to really fill the gap for people experiencing mental health or substance use concerns for all ages. So our Kayak program is specifically focused on children, adolescents, and young adults. So we serve up to the age of 24. I don't know if anybody listening on this call or here has ever tried to access mental health services for yourself, for your children, or for a loved one. And if you have, you may know that it's a really complicated process. It is not easy to navigate finding practitioners that specialize in what you need, getting accurate information, accurate diagnosis, and accurate or appropriate treatment. There's lots of barriers that are put in place by our healthcare systems, and families often get lost in those systems. And we know that a good portion of the clients that we serve are the most vulnerable and have some of the most complex needs. So when me, as a really high functioning woman who works in the field, get confused and overwhelmed and burdened by the system, imagine what our families that are struggling so much are going through as well. So that's what we try to do, is remove those barriers for people, hold people's hands walking through the system, and try to get them the help that they need in a timely manner without having to have them wait for months and months at a time. So we work really, really closely with Poudre School District. We have some presentation, or we have some presence with Loveland as well, but more closely with Poudre at this point in time. And then we work really closely with all of our partnering agencies, all of the service providers in the community as well. So anybody can be referred to our program, regardless of income, regardless of issue, regardless of age, and we're going to work with them as best as we can. So they can self-refer by calling us directly, or we can get referrals from schools, from primary care, or from other agencies. When somebody is referred to our program, we really try to take the responsibility away from the family for actually reaching out for help. What happens so often, and we probably all know this ourselves as well, you're at your doctor's office or you're talking to somebody and you're having some difficulties. And in that moment in time, oh yes, I'm going to make that call. Oh yes, I'm going to eat better. Oh yes, I'm going to stop this behavior. And there's all of that verbal lip service for what we're willing to do. But I like to call it the Bermuda Triangle of a parking lot. Because what happens is you leave that office, you leave that conversation with your SRO or with your primary care or with a school counselor, and then something happens and it's like it just leaves, everything leaves, because our families live in chaos and live in crisis so often. So we want to take that burden away from the families for having to actually call us. So when we get a referral, we reach out to the family. and we say, hey, your school let us know that they're a little bit concerned or that you seem to be struggling, or your doctor's office let us know that you have some concerns about some behaviors that are happening. How can we help you? So we try to take that away from the families and their responsibility to make it easier for them and to normalize that life is hard and things are hard and our kids are struggling. So how can we help them? So once they get into the CAYAC system, we have a multidisciplinary team of child and adolescent board certified psychiatrists, a psychologist who does psychological testing, professional master's level licensed behavioral health specialist, and care coordinators. So we are a full wraparound continuum of care to help kids and families identify what is the main issue that's going on, how can we start interventions, and then get you connected to long-term community providers. So we're not just a one and done. Once you're part of our program, you're part of our program, and we're going to keep you until we know for sure that you're connected with outside resources. So for families, what that looks like is they might just talk with a therapist a couple times and we get them connected with care and they're good to go. For some of our other families, it might be a lot more intensive than that. And it's coordinating care with the schools, coordinating care with the SROs, coordinating care with all of the care team providers that are around this family to help them get the services they need. So it could be working with our mental health specialist. It could be seeing a psychiatrist through our program for brief services, med management, or some kids really need some testing. A couple little facts just so you all are aware in our community: to get a young child into a psychiatrist in Fort Collins, it could be as much as a 3 to 6 month wait to get medications for a child who might need them. We try to really reduce that and work very, very hard to get everybody in our program within a week or two time at the max. If a family needs psychological testing, there's a lot of behaviors that are going on that are out of control or don't really have an explanation, or people are confused about what's happening, then psychological testing is a very appropriate next step. But for families, even with insurance, psychological testing can cost thousands of dollars, which is a barrier and cost prohibitive for a lot of families. So our ability to work with families is to really look at the finances as well and to remove whatever barriers there might be. So we work with every family on a sliding scale. And then if finances are still a barrier, then we're going to work with them even more for that. So we just want to make sure that we are meeting our families where they're at and providing the services that they need. One of the biggest things that we do is our care coordination, as I said, and really working with the community providers and service providers to make sure that we're all on the same page. Again, from a family experience, it can be really, really overwhelming and frustrating when you get multiple different messages from different people. So we want to make sure that everybody's communicating the same, is on the same page and speaking the same language and one consistent message with our families as well.
Kristen, I just want to let you know you have a couple minutes left.
Great, thank you. So just a couple things to just reiterate really quickly when we talk about this is we're able to serve anybody in Larimer County. So that is one of the restrictions for our program, is the clients do have to reside in Larimer County, and they can come to us, again, let me just stress this, in any way, shape or form, through a self-referral or through a referral from a provider as well. And of course, in my very last couple seconds, I just want to say our phone number. So if anybody on this call is listening and would like more information, or feels like, I know some families that could really benefit from this service, our phone number is 970-221-3308. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Kayak sounds like a great program, and I have that phone number typed into my chat as we speak, so I will get that sent off once our next panelists start their presentation. I believe our next two panelists are going to present together. So from our district attorney's office, we have Bob and Carrie. Go ahead. There's Bob.
Good afternoon, everyone. Carrie's going to provide most of the information on the diversion program, as she's the one that runs that. Our office is fairly unique in Colorado as far as how our diversion programs work. We have an internal diversion program, so many of the cases that are filed with us are screened initially for diversion and for that program, and also for other resources that are out there in the community. And so as the SROs were talking about, a lot of times we don't even see some of the kids that are potentially committing some of the lower level crimes, either at school or even in the community, because those cases are referred to the Center for Family Outreach or Restorative Justice before we even see it, or we never see some of those. The cases that do get referred to our office are some of those that potentially continue to commit crimes and haven't been successful with any of the diversion programming that have been referred by the SROs. And so we end up with those cases. And a lot of times we end up putting those kids through the diversion program through our office and really making similar referrals to other programs just to see if we can get them to buy in with a case potentially to be filed. So when a case comes into our office and we actually put it in diversion, that case never enters the court system. That kid never typically goes to court. There's no juvenile record necessarily that they're looking to try and keep out. Really our goal is to try and provide services to those juveniles and their families to get them basically back on track, to keep them from committing further crimes or getting them the help with substance use or mental health problems that they may be suffering from. And our goal, and I've told parents and kids this, my goal is to never see you again. And we really want to try and provide as much service as we can on the front end so that we don't have to put those kids through the juvenile system. And I think, having worked in other jurisdictions throughout my career, Larimer County is uniquely suited in that we have many programs out there. And obviously, we're always still looking for more diverse programs that can assist juveniles and families that have different issues or that might be able to take advantage of some of the unique personalities of the juveniles and the families that we deal with. So we're always on the lookout for that. The other unique aspect to Larimer County and specifically the DA's office is we have a very good working relationship with not only law enforcement, but with the magistrate, juvenile probation, even the defense attorneys, the public defenders. We all work very collaboratively and really trying to figure out what is going to be best for the juveniles in our community. DHS and the Family Partnership Program is a huge resource for us. And we all meet numerous times. I've been on Zoom meetings and in many meetings with most of the people on this panel almost on a weekly basis. And we all meet and talk about, what does our community have to offer these juveniles and the families? What can we provide to try and keep them out of the system? For those juveniles that are in the system, what resources can we provide to them to try and keep them from, maintaining in the system or lagging in the system, or even moving further into the system, such as to the Division of Youth Services. We have the diversion program. Carrie's going to talk about that a little bit more. Emily Humphrey, when she was with our office, also started the Gun Safety Coalition, and I think Jeff Schwartz is going to talk a little more about that, but that's also a very up-and-coming program that's received a lot of attention from the rest of the state. So, Carrie, I don't know if are you still there? If you want to talk about diversion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank y'all. You covered a lot, so this makes me and my job way easier.
I didn't know if you were still there, so I figured I should.
Turn off our cameras. So as I introduced myself before, my name's Carrie Bielemberg, and I supervise our diversion programs in the district attorney's office. So Bob kind of already explained a little bit about what diversion is and how those cases end up to our office. I think that that's always really helpful for the community and for families to understand kind of the behind the scenes work. And so our SROs are a huge resource, and they're also, a large portion of the referrals for diversion that come to us because they're interacting with the kids at school and seeing them and really getting to know them and what their needs are. And so it is not uncommon for youth that come to our diversion program or come to our attention at the district attorney's office to have already been referred to services in the community. We're very lucky in Larimer County, as others have shared, that we do have a lot of resources available to us. And so that makes our diversion program also very unique. We only have myself and one other staff in our district attorney's office that support diversion. Otherwise, we completely rely on our community to support the 500 plus youth that come through our diversion program each year. And so that is a huge accomplishment, because we do have so many resources available to us, and we're able to refer out and connect families to resources that don't have to be tied to the system and to a criminal offense in order to get support. And so what that means for us is that, you know, if these families were to make it through diversion and then maybe a year from now, they are beginning to struggle again, maybe the juvenile wants to re-engage in counseling or something like that, they can. They don't have to get in more trouble to receive a service. And that is certainly the goal for our program. And as Bob mentioned, we don't want to see youth again, because if we do, that means that something didn't work or we missed something, they're back here again. So a little bit of history about diversion. We've actually had diversion in our office for about the past, I think, 24 years at this point. So this is a really long-standing program. It hasn't always looked this way. It certainly has evolved over the years, as has our community. And so we've really grown and expanded what types of cases we accept into diversion and the different types of diversion we can offer. So at this time, as I mentioned earlier, it's close to 500 cases each year that come through our diversion program. We sit at right about 46% of all juvenile cases that enter the district attorney's office that never go into a courtroom. They never have to see Magistrate Zoe or interact with any system beyond either myself or our other diversion staff. I think another big piece that shifted over the years that I really appreciate is who runs the diversion program. So historically, we've had a victim's advocate who's ran our diversion program. We've had a DA investigator, so a law enforcement officer who's run diversion. And now we have social workers. And one, I'm really proud of that, because that means I get to work with diversion. But two, I think it feels different. So diversion, and the goal there is to keep these kids out of the system and keep them from interacting further with law enforcement, attorneys, the magistrate, anything that has to do with that system. And so having a social worker come out and speak with you and your family in our district attorney's office, or maybe even somewhere in the community, feels much different than having a law enforcement officer, or somebody who has the Batman belt, as we call it, with a gun and a badge. And so I think that that has been a really positive shift as well. And I think that that's really changed the way that diversion feels in our community. So with diversion, kind of the way that it looks, and certainly COVID has changed this, but typically what happens is, as the SROs mentioned, a ticket or citation is written, comes to our office. Like Bob said, you know, we're looking at criminal history. Have they interacted with our office at all in the past? And then we also get collateral information. So typically then we're reaching out to the family right away to hear from them, their take on the situation. What do they think their child could benefit from? What are we missing? You know, and really helping to hold this child accountable and help them to be successful in not only answering to whatever behavior or incident occurred, but also helping surround them with resources so that they don't come back to us in the future. Collateral information also comes from the school. So sometimes we're reaching directly out to our SROs if they haven't already reached out to us, teachers, counselors, you name it. Sometimes they have a Department of Human Services worker and we're speaking with them as well. And all of that information contributes to our decision about what we do with a case, what's in the juvenile's best interests, and what's required of diversion. So then what we do is we invite the family and the juvenile in to come and meet with us. And those meetings are typically about an hour long. We have a questionnaire that they fill out, and then we go through that together and really get to know this kid outside of their ticket, outside of their incident, because they're coming to see us for probably one of the worst things or most embarrassing things that's ever happened. And so then we get the chance to get to know them and value and respect them outside of that, because there's so much more than what happened. And from there, that's really what we use to decide what diversion would look like for them. It's important to note too that if this is a type of case where there was a victim involved, so maybe some type of fight at school, Officer Sargent also brought up, possession of private images, things like that. If we have an identified victim on a case, our victim's advocate also is reaching out to the identified victim and their family to get their input on what happens. And so I think that that's really valuable too, because not only are we acting in the juvenile's best interest when making decisions, but we also have an obligation at the district attorney's office to make our victims whole to the best of our ability and serve and protect our community to the best of our ability. So I think that that's a huge piece. So requirements of diversion, we're very creative. We have a lot of resources, as I mentioned. So pretty typically they're making repair or repairing the harm that's been done in some way, whether that's community service hours, if the school was affected, so maybe they caused some damage at school or there was a fight there, they're doing their community service at school or writing letters of apology. Maybe they are engaging in our restorative justice programs and actually participating and, alongside their victim and secondary victims who've been harmed by what happened. Another big piece that we see is mental health needs. And so I would say it's probably close to 80% of our youth coming through diversion do engage in mental health services. So counseling of some kind, whether that's a group or individual. So that's very often a requirement of diversion because we think they could benefit from it. And so all we ask is that they give it a shot, and typically those youth actually really enjoy it and they stick with their counselor longer than even what's required. Other requirements, sometimes substance use testing, so making sure that kids are sober and safe, especially if they're of driving age. That's a big requirement and a big concern for us too that we look to address. If substance use is a really big concern, we're having them engage in services like treatment groups or counseling that's dedicated to that need as well. We also utilize Colorado State University for mentors and coaching, and a big aspect of youth and growing up is just having somebody in your corner and having a positive adult role model. And so that's a huge piece of diversion as well, is just trying to link them to positive people, whether that is, a teacher at school who we have them volunteer with, or a formal mentor or coach through a community agency, CSU, the Matthews House, Jacob Center, things like that. So we really are a resource, and we're, just doing our best to piece together a plan that works for youth, and then we're monitoring that plan. So we're making sure that they're complying and they're holding up their end of the bargain, because diversion is voluntary. So the youth have to want to be a part of diversion, and they have to be accountable for themselves, their actions, and kind of how we got to this point. Sometimes we also don't do anything with cases. So sometimes we might meet with a youth who got a ticket and, they already have all the services that we think they could benefit from in place, or they've already made amends, and there's no need for further intervention. So I think that's important to also share, that we don't do something with every single case. Sometimes the situation has already resolved itself. And so that's considered a no file with our office. And our Chief Bob also signs off on that as well. Diversion typically is only 3 to 5 months, so it is a fairly short-term program. Across the state, diversion sometimes looks longer. We are very intentional in Larimer County that we want it to be more short-term, because we have other panelists that you'll hear from tonight with probation and court services that they are involved with juveniles more long-term, because if the juvenile needs that support more long-term, maybe diversion isn't necessarily the best place for them. I will say we have specific tracks of diversion, and I won't get into those too much, but one example is we have a very specialized track of diversion for youth who commit sexual offenses. These cases obviously are not resolved in 3 to 5 months. It is more like 1 to 2 years. And that is a program that, one, we're very proud of in our office. We're very unique. We're one of the only district attorney's office in the state that actually diverts youth with sexual offenses. 2, those cases are screened very thoroughly before we determine that they're appropriate for diversion. What we know about those youth is that about 97% of youth who commit sexual offenses are victims themselves. And so our goal is not only to make our victims whole, but also to get this youth the services and the treatment that they need. And so those are supervised very heavily. They are supervised directly through our office and are engaging in very intensive treatment as a part of that. We also have created an internet safety or diversion program to address sexting offenses. And so that is something else that we've added that's very educational based for both the parents and the youth. And that's something that we actually allow SROs or other community members to self-refer. So the youth doesn't even need to have a ticket to be a part of that program, because again, our goal is that they don't end up to us. And so if we can allow these services to be available sooner than them actually getting a ticketed offense, that's our goal as well. And then we've also developed a track of diversion to address high-risk youth, so youth at risk of exploitation in some way. That's a real need in our community here in Northern Colorado, and so we are, much like the diversion for youth who commit sexual offenses, we're very careful about those cases and if they come through diversion and what their level of supervision looks like. Also very treatment heavy, so getting them the services that they need in order to be successful and reach a point of stability. I know that there was a question about COVID and how that impacts services. I just want to take a moment to go ahead and answer that as far as diversion goes. So I think we've actually not really missed a beat with diversion and COVID. We certainly had to adapt, as everyone has. So a lot of our classes moved to an online platform. Youth were able to go ahead and do counseling virtually. And then like even our internet safety class, we just created an online version of that as opposed to the in-person. And then we increased our check-ins with youth just to make sure that everybody's doing okay and they are getting the support they need, because that was a difficult time and continues to be a difficult time for everybody, especially our youth who are stuck at home and now having to do online school. So it's definitely uncharted territory, but I'm proud of our program and our community resources that they've really adapted. And at least with diversion, we haven't really missed a beat. So, gosh, I think that's it. If Bob doesn't have anything to add about diversion, I will stop talking.
I just want to add one thing, and I think you touched on that a little bit, Carrie, but you know, went back and looked at the statistics over the last year or so, 2 years, and 46% of the citations or kids that were sent to our office for committing crimes, 46% of those were sent through our diversion program. And this is just anecdotal, but I think if you take into account the number of crimes that are committed that the SROs are referring out and not even sending to our office, I think we could easily say approximately 50% of the crimes committed by youths in our jurisdiction, Larimer County, and Walden, Jackson County, I think at least approximately 50% of those cases never go to court, at least initially. And so I think that's a huge number. I'm not sure what the numbers are for diversion in other areas of our state, but I think we take a lot of pride in that. We have very good leadership in our office with Cliff Riedel is very passionate about the diversion program for juveniles, as is Mitch Murray. And anytime Carrie is amazing and has all these crazy new ideas of different resources we can try and provide for juveniles. She just came up with one this week, and we ran it up the chain, and it's already going. And so having that support from our office, as well as the support of our other board members and community members, like Family Partnership through DHS, Probation is very willing to help us with anything we can do for diversion. We have the CYDC program, which I believe Magistrate Zoe will talk about a little bit. Our community, as far as our juvenile courts go, is very, very collaborative, and we meet, like I said, on at least a weekly basis to talk about what can we put in place. And I think that really provides really a safe kind of a place for juveniles, even the ones that are potentially committing crimes and creating issues, not only in our schools, but in our community. And so I think, the number of kids that we send through diversion is very high. And I think it's very unique in the state of Colorado and probably in the nation, I guess. So thank you all for attending. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Carrie. And thank you for your hard work in the diversion program. Now we're going to move on to our public defender's office. And I think we're in a unique situation here in Larimer County that our district attorney and our public defender's office work together well with the intent of helping our juveniles never come back to the system. So I'd like to hand it over to Heather Siegel from our public defender's office.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. There's been a lot of talk so far about diversion, and my job actually starts for the juveniles who don't make it to diversion, the juveniles who maybe don't have a very stable living situation, or they don't have parents who are involved or able to really facilitate getting them to the diversion program, or juveniles who are involved to such a degree that maybe they need a higher level of intervention. So as mentioned, almost half of cases do go to diversion, but then the other half of cases end up in court. And so when a juvenile gets to court, that's when my office becomes involved. The state a few years ago decided that it was really important that any juvenile who ends up in the criminal justice system gets to have an attorney. And so it doesn't matter if they qualify financially or not, if their parents have a lot of money or no money, every juvenile is entitled to have representation. And that's incredibly important for a lot of reasons that I'll talk about. But one is that you've probably heard already a little bit, the idea of the best interest of the juvenile. What is best for this kid? Well, the one thing that my office does that's different than everyone else is that as the attorney representing the juvenile, our job is to tell people what the juvenile wants. And so although I may have an opinion about what I think is best for the kid that I'm representing, my job is not to necessarily stand up for that. It's to tell the parents or the court or probation or the district attorney's office what my client thinks is fair and what my client would like to see happen. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of kids who never end up in court, but when they do, they can get to court through a few ways. One is they are summoned to court, so they're given a ticket, they have an appearance date. The second is they are arrested or detained and taken to a juvenile detention facility. If they're in a detention facility, they're brought to court, and from the very first court appearance, my office is involved and we're appointed to help that juvenile. And we're talking about whether or not they have to stay in the detention facility or they get to go home. The cases that I see that come to court are cases that are complicated. They're cases where families maybe are chaotic and they need some resources. Maybe there aren't two parents in the home or even one parent in the home. And maybe the parent is a victim. And so that can create some complications. So we're trying to figure out how can we safely get this juvenile to be home. And again, my job is to advocate for what that kid would like. Sometimes the kids that I'm working with say, hey, I need a break. I don't necessarily want to rush home, or I have some concerns about my safety if I go home. And that's something important that we would share with the court if the juvenile wanted me to. We also obviously work really hard to try to get kids out of detention because there's a lot of research that it's not very good for juveniles to spend time in facilities. It's just not. And I know Hava will talk more about family partnerships, and our county works really hard to not have kids in jail, to not have kids spend time in facilities because the research isn't good for outcomes for those situations. So when a juvenile gets to court, they can be 10 years old up to actually over 18, but they had to have been charged with a crime that happened before their 18th birthday. When they get to court, the charges can be very minor. They could be marijuana possession, and it could be all the way up to a very serious offense. It doesn't matter what level of offense they have, they're still entitled to an attorney. And so if they're not in custody, meaning they're not detained, they need to fill out an application to see if they financially qualify. And as I mentioned, even if their family has a lot of money, they still are entitled to have a lawyer because it's really important, and the state has said, every kid gets to have an attorney. Just to give you an idea of who does qualify for an attorney through the public defender, in order to qualify for a family of 3, they have to make less than $27,000 a year. And so that's only about $2,200 a month. So our guidelines are pretty strict. But again, if a kid's family makes more money than that and the kid would like to have an attorney helping them, the court can still appoint a lawyer and they can be charged $400 per case, which may seem like a lot of money, but for a lawyer, obviously that's a pretty good deal, I think, for them. So we again get working with the kids who are in the court system. And one thing that my office does is sometimes we do reach back out to the district attorney and say, hey, this kid actually is good for diversion. And here are some things that may have changed or some things you may not have known. And every now and then the district attorney's office will kick a case back out and let the kid go into diversion. So that does happen every now and then. When the kid is in court and working through their case, our job is, again, to be their voice. We're telling people what they want to have happen, but we're also there to work with the kids so that they understand why they're in court. As you can imagine, a 10-year-old who's in court, which luckily doesn't happen all that often, but they need to understand kind of why they're there, what the court system looks like, what their rights are. And so our job is to make sure that we can go through that process with them. Even though they're juveniles, every juvenile is entitled to plead guilty or not guilty, just like an adult would be. Some cases, they have the right to have a jury listen to their cases, and in some they don't. So there would be a court trial in front of Magistrate Zoe or in front of a judge in our county. So they need to understand those options. We work really hard with the juveniles to figure out what they think is fair. It's really important. There's a lot of research about procedural fairness. If people in the system think that the outcome is fair, then they're going to be much more likely to do a good job and to hopefully not come back into the system. And so we're talking with the district attorney's office, telling them more about the kids that we're working with. And as you can imagine, a lot of the kids we work with have pretty significant trauma histories. They do have mental health and substance use disorders. And so our job is to fight for what they want, but also to make sure that what the sentence is fitting for the juvenile. So we're here also to make sure that they're getting services. Something that's really great in our juvenile court is we can ask for referrals to get different types of assessments. Some kids may have a traumatic brain injury or they have other issues going on, and anyone in the court can ask to have them evaluated. And certainly there are limitations, but it's really important that these kids get the proper services so that they don't end up coming back into the system. There is a second type of lawyer I'm just going to touch on briefly that you may hear about in the juvenile court, and that's called the guardian ad litem. That's also a licensed attorney, but their job is also to let the court know what's in the juvenile's best interest. So again, the defense attorney is the one person in the room who's talking about what the juvenile wants to have happen. But the guardian ad litem is appointed in certain situations. For instance, if a parent is a victim in their child's case, it'd be very awkward for them to have to tell the court what they think should happen to their kid while also maybe dealing with some of their own emotions about being involved in the case. And so a guardian ad litem is a neutral person who kind of steps in, acts like a parent, and meets with all the parties, decides what they think just from their perspective would be in the best interest, again, so that the parent may not be in an awkward situation. This also comes up if a child has for some reason been removed from the custody of their parents, if they're involved with the Department of Human Services, or maybe their parents aren't able to participate in court, or we've had juveniles who are maybe living in a different state and ended up in Colorado and their family isn't here. And so we want to make sure that kids have somebody who can act like a parent in that situation to make sure the court has information. And guardian ad litems are wonderful for a lot of reasons, but particularly they are just awesome at helping to advocate for the kids and knowing the resources to get them involved. Something that I think is really important from my office is that over the years, we've really developed a dedicated team of lawyers because we want to have people who are focused on juvenile representation, which is very, very different from the representation of adults, partly because of the collaborative nature of it, but also because juveniles are just very different. Obviously, brain development is a very important piece of understanding why kids may end up in the system. And it's really important for my office to know how to advocate well to make sure that people don't forget that even if a kid commits a serious offense, that they're still a kid and we still need to treat them like a kid. And so those are some important things that we focus on. I really enjoyed working in juvenile court, and I've done it and I'm sure I will again. And I think the reason I enjoy it so much is because of the social work aspect, because we really are working to try to advocate for the youth. Even if my job is different than those in the courtroom, I still very much care about what happens. And I want to make sure that everybody is treating juveniles the the way that they should be, because they are kids, even if they've made some silly mistakes or done some really horrible things. And so happy to answer questions when you get there.
Thank you so much, Heather. I learned a lot there. So I appreciate all the information you gave us. Next up, we have Jeff Schwartz. And Jeff is part of our Juvenile Gun Safety Coalition that was mentioned earlier by our district attorney's office. So Jeff is just going to give us a little information about that program. Jeff, go ahead.
Great, thank you. So like I said in my introduction, I do a lot of the same stuff that Heather does. She gave a great description of what happens in juvenile court, and the public defenders represent the majority of kids in there. So they do a lot of the heavy lifting in juvenile court, and they do a great job. Like I said, I'm alternate defense counsel, so I get appointed if there's a conflict with the public defender's office. The same thing applies in terms of qualifying for representation and being appointed. But I also sit on the Juvenile Gun Safety Coalition here in Larimer County, and I'm lucky enough to sit on that coalition with several of the members of tonight's panel. And what the program is, or what the coalition is that we've discovered over the last several years that there are a lot of our youth that are either lost to gun violence or are charged with committing gun violence. And so Emily Humphrey had a really great idea to assemble a group of people in the community and in the system to address that. And one of the goals of our campaign is that we believe that every resident in the county has a shared ownership of our community's safety. And so what we're trying to do is that we put together a group of people that includes SROs from several of the schools, public safety information officers. We have the support of the sheriff, the chief of police, the district attorney's office, the public defender's office, the private defense bar, the Boys and Girls Club, and UC Health are just some of the main players in our coalition. It's a three-phase program. We've broken that into phase one being a responsible gun ownership and safe handling and storage of firearms. We've worked with the group to prepare rack cards, which are just information cards that some of the gun shops have allowed us to put there. We have them in several different places around the community. And we have a little bit more of a friendlier one for doctors' offices, because we think that one of the places that's a good place to educate parents about gun safety is when they bring their kids to the doctors. I don't know if many of you have kids, but if you go to the pediatrician, that's one of the questions they ask, is if there's firearms in the home. And we think that it's important to start early with responsible gun ownership and the safe handling and storage. Our phase two is encouraging students to report concerning behaviors or guns to school, or guns at the school or to the school, using tools like Safe to Tell, which is a really great program. Safe to Tell allows kids to make reports without worrying that they're going to be outed as the person who made the report. It allows them to reach out so that they can feel safe. We're doing that through educational programs with our coalition. We have phase one prepared an amazing couple of videos. You can see those on the Larimer County website and the DA's office if you search for the Juvenile Gun Safety Coalition. They're educational videos. They're very well produced, and we hope that they reach as big of an audience as we can have it reach, because it's really got some great information and scenarios that show what would happen in a situation where guns entered the mix, and what would happen in situations if things had been done differently and in a more responsible way. The phase that I'm part of is phase three, and that's working with youth in the criminal justice system who've been involved in gun-related incidents. So that can be kids who have been charged with gun-related incidents, or kids who are currently serving sentences for gun-related incidents. One of the other members of the committee and I have met with one of her clients who is finishing a sentence at the Division of Youth Services, which is kind of one of the top or one of the higher level sentences that a juvenile can receive. He's received some amazing services through the Division of Youth Services, and we're working with him to potentially educate others who have been in his position to tell them the things that can happen when you get involved in guns and gun violence. We've unfortunately, during COVID, had a bit of a pause put on our ability to educate in classrooms or boys and girls clubs and those different types of things, but we're getting ramped up again. And one of the other things that we're excited about is that we're going to start implementing suicide prevention a bit as well. We're not taking over by any means suicide prevention, but we have included some people on our committee who specialize and work in that area. So it's an all-encompassing type of a gun safety situation. We're trying to prevent as many juveniles from being affected, whether that be as victims or being charged with gun crimes. And so we work very closely with the community and rely on the community to help us spread the message and try to educate on gun safety. And I'd be happy to answer any questions when we get to that point.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And just for everybody, Jeff mentioned a YouTube video. So I'm going to send that out in the chat, and I'm going to include a few other videos from our SRO team. I'm going to send out about 4 links to different YouTube videos that I invite you to watch after, of course, all of our presentation or our panelists have spoken and our Q&A. But I want to get those videos to you all now before I forget. So I just sent that out. Thank you, Jeff, again. Now we're going to move on to Tracy Stromberg from our probation team. Tracy, go ahead.
Hi. So yes, I'm going to give you all just a brief overview of our probation department and what our juvenile officers, what their roles are in the juvenile justice system. So the Larimer County Probation Department serves both Larimer and Jackson counties. We have a total of 3 offices. We have 2 offices in Fort Collins, 1 in Loveland. I guess we have 4 because we also have 1 up in Jackson County, which is in Walden. Here in Larimer County, we have 7 probation officers working specifically with our juvenile population and have about 237 clients that we are supervising currently. And we have officers in both Fort Collins and Loveland to meet all of those juveniles' needs. We have 4 specialty caseloads within the juvenile unit. We have 1 probation officer who is trained in supervising our juveniles who have committed sexual offenses. We have 1 officer who supervises our clients in the Juvenile Recovery Program, which Magistrate Zoe will talk about in a few minutes. We have a few officers who are assigned to our juvenile intensive supervised probation population, and then the remainder of our officers supervise our juveniles that are sentenced to regular probation. Just to give you an idea of what the process looks like when we get a client placed on probation, they're assigned a probation officer, and we found that it's best or working out really well for our probation officers to be assigned to certain schools. Having our officers build those relationships with the schools have been very beneficial in working with these clients and assisting them as much as possible. So when a client comes to probation, we figure out which school they attend, and then that would be their probation officer. Or we also have to consider those specialty circumstances. So if a juvenile has committed a sexual offense, they would be assigned to that specific officer. So based off of school or their offense, basically. As the first step in working with our clients, we meet with the juveniles and their parents, and we complete an intake, which consists of reviewing the paperwork, the terms and conditions, and the parental responsibilities with the juvenile and their parents. For standard conditions of probation, there's 18 conditions that these juveniles will need to follow. And then the court will specifically individualize certain conditions or order certain conditions based on the needs of the client when they're presented in court. So after signing the terms and conditions of probation, we complete an assessment. The assessment we use is called the Colorado Juvenile Risk Assessment, also known as the CJAC. And the CJAC highlights the juvenile's strengths, but also the areas of need, along with presents the risks that they have to our community. Once these factors are determined, we develop a case plan or goals with our client, which is individualized and based on their criminogenic needs, which is all guided by this assessment. So throughout their time on probation, not only are we working with these juveniles to hold them accountable, ensuring that they're meeting or complying with all of the court's orders, but we're also making referrals to community-based services to help meet the needs of these juveniles. And you've heard time and time again from the previous presenters that we have so many resources in this community, and it's our job as probation officers to do those assessments. We also do another assessment, I'm sorry I didn't mention earlier, called a SUS-1A, which goes over the juvenile's history with substance abuse. And so it's our job to make these appropriate referrals for these kids and their families to help, you know, meet them where they're at, or help guide them, help get them whatever help they need. Somebody else mentioned, I believe it was the SROs, they mentioned a few different times, they've had parents contacting them multiple times saying they're at their wits' end, they don't know what to do, they need help. We work a lot with these parents as well in trying to help develop their skills, help refer them to services. There's a lot of in-home services that we're able to refer these families to. You know, it's our goal, just as it is the diversion program, to never see these clients and their families again. And so we are constantly working with these families, trying to give them the skills that they need so that they can help be confident in dealing with their children's behaviors without probation or court intervention. Our officers are all trained in evidence-based practices to include motivational interviewing, strategies for behavioral change, and some strength-based approaches and incentives. Our probation, Larimer County probation is very unique in the fact that they are very supportive of our creativity. Our probation officers are constantly thinking of new ways to work with these clients and help them in any way that we can. We've developed a number of programs in-house. Not only do we hold impact of crime classes or Y-Try programs or MRT, which is moral recognition therapy treatment group. But we also do fun activities such as a summer program where we have kids meet us in a park during the summer, 3 days a week, to play sports and do other team building activities. We've done spring break programs, painting classes, you know, just surrounding these kids by as much pro-social activity as possible. And it also gives us the opportunity to see them outside of the office, get to know them in a different sense. And it's been very beneficial for us to run these groups. So as you can see from everyone who has presented tonight, there are several stakeholders within the juvenile justice realm. We work incredibly closely with one another, and I think that's been a very clear message that's been represented here tonight. Because of this, I believe the probation department, we are able to hold a success rate of about 80% year after year, which is generally, you know, this is a very high success rate, and it's higher than the state average. So we have, I think, our diversion program to thank for all the hard work that they're doing, our family partnership program, which Hava will talk about in a bit, but we're just very grateful to have all of these partnerships. An 80% success rate is very impressive considering we have much higher risk cases than the rest of the state. So that was a very quick description, but I know we're running out of time. So please, if I haven't clarified anything, please put some comments in the chat.
Thank you so much, Tracy. We appreciate the very good description. It was quick, but it was good. So next up, we have Hava with our family partnership team. Go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Hava Simmons again, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Family Partnerships Unit, and that is the unit that I supervise. It is underneath Child Welfare in Larimer County, but we do specialize in juvenile justice. I have 9 caseworkers that work within my unit. We do have 3 caseworkers who are bilingual. And that's a huge priority for us in representing marginalized populations in our community, specifically the Latinx community and those who are monolingual. For those who are speaking other languages, we are able to access the language line, but disparities is an area of focus for everybody really who's here speaking to you on this panel today. And we do our best to serve our entire community with equity. My unit was established approximately 10 years ago. I've been supervising the unit for 7. The purpose of establishing the Family Partnerships Unit was to keep our kids who are involved in the delinquency system in our communities. We know that kids are best with families. All of the evidence points to that. We also know that kids are not served best in detention settings or commitment settings. It doesn't mean that there aren't appropriate times to use those settings, but those should be a last resort. And so for that reason, the Family Partnerships Unit was established in order to develop programs and supports in the community for kids who were very high risk and were needing a variety of services. So our unit specifically works again with those youth who are high risk. And there are certain assessments we use. Tracy mentioned the Colorado Juvenile Risk Assessment. That's one that we use to measure risk. That is risk to the community essentially. And so we're serving youth who are not your average, just picked up a charge for smoking weed in the park. They're usually kids who have other things going on in their life. And those things may be drug use by them or their parents. It could be mental health issues by them or their parents. And when I say parents, I also mean caregivers. So it could be grandparents, aunts, uncles, guardians, whatever the case may be. We also have a lot of kids who, the vast majority of our kids have some type of child protection history. And so again, there's things going on within the family system that could use a little bit of help. Our program is voluntary, although the actual initial intake can be court ordered and families can be ordered to participate in the intake. Once we make the decision to open up a case ongoing, we do that with the support and alongside families. And so that's families saying, we need help. And it's amazing how many wonderful families trust us to come into their homes and walk alongside them. So we are always humbled by that opportunity. My caseworkers prior to COVID were meeting with families a minimum of once a week. And so it is very intensive case management. And that's why we're targeting high risk youth and families, because we don't want to overserve kids and their families. We know that that's just as damaging as underserving them. So finding that sweet spot throughout this whole kind of array that you're hearing spoken about tonight. So whether that's, not even introducing kids to the system and working with SROs to get the services they need, or choosing a path of diversion, all the way up into those youth who are actually involved and looking at, is probation the right decision? And we take that very seriously in this jurisdiction. So again, we don't want to underserve and we definitely don't want to overserve. And so we kind of have found that spot in our unit to serve those who are high risk to be most effective in terms of the outcomes that we measure, which we do look at and take very seriously. We are really liaisons in many ways to accessing services. Sometimes that's through Medicaid, sometimes that's through private insurance, and sometimes that's through funds specifically available to the Department of Human Services. There are also funds available through the Colorado Youth Detention Continuum, which Magistrate Zoe will speak a bit more about. And so again, we're kind of helping, we're really system navigators. We're really trying to help families kind of get through this clunky system and figure out, you know, how do I get this need met? Where do I go for this? We work a great deal with our partners in Thompson School District and Poudre School District in figuring out, you know, what is the best part of kind of location for our kids to be served. So really in our unit, that's what we're doing a lot of. We have our sweet spot kind of caseload is between 8 and 10. And again, that allows us to really provide very intensive case management. And we are also working to find sustainable supports for families. We don't want to be in their lives forever. And we understand that just us being involved is traumatic. And so we work to help them kind of drum up the support they need, whether that's providing respite services or providing a safety net, being there to vent for the kid, for the parents, for the caregivers. So really we do that. We also have the opportunity to access family meetings, which allows family the opportunity to bring people to the table, and their voice is the most important in those meetings. So really, again, coming alongside them and helping to determine how we can best be of service to families. So engagement is a huge priority for us as well. So in a very, very minute nutshell, that is what our unit does. I also personally serve on the Colorado Council for Human Trafficking. And in that role, I also help to convey the voice of those who work directly with youth who are involved in trafficking through the child welfare and juvenile justice system. So that's another opportunity to kind of provide a voice for that part of the population. And we meet together on a statewide level to really address that and talk about those needs. As I mentioned also in my introduction, I also chair the Juvenile Services Planning Committee. And again, that's mostly the people that you see here and a couple more that really talk about what are the gaps in services that we see in our community, and how do we want to address those gaps both financially and in recruitment of service providers working in our nonprofit world, partnering out and about in the community to figure out how we address the needs of our youth and our families. And then kind of, you know, the last piece that I will leave you with is for the child welfare side of things, my passion and my focus is adolescents. And so I also address a lot of concerns and worries from the community, which can be accessed through the Larimer County DHS website. And if you click on the little link about adolescent questions, they all come to me, literally. And so I'm always happy to address those needs and support the community as I can there, as is my staff and others. And those don't have to be justice-involved youth. So I will say there's somebody from our unit present in all court hearings. I also have somebody who serves on the Juvenile Recovery Court group. And then I also have a staff that works exclusively with adolescents who have committed sex offenses. And that's an unusual, population. And so that really requires a certain area of expertise, and that person is also bilingual. So we are serving monolingual families in a sensitive way in that area as well. And so that really kind of sums up, what we do as a whole. And anything that you might need, I'm happy to address now or in the future. And again, thank you for your commitment to wanting to hear more about the juvenile justice system tonight.
Thank you, Hava, and thank you for all the work you do for the juveniles in Larimer County. You're a very busy woman. Next up, it was really important for this group to have an individual with some lived experience. Talk to the group about their experience with some of the different aspects of our juvenile system. So we have Zoe, and she introduced herself earlier, but she is a former high school student from the Poudre School District, and she's a Poudre Impala. As my husband is too. So Zoe, go ahead.
Currently, I am.
There you are. Hi there, Zoe.
Hi, can you?
You know, you're going in and out a little bit.
Okay.
Oh, no, I think you're good now. Go ahead and if
Okay.
I need to stop you, I will.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. I just got the notification that my internet is unstable. So go ahead if at any point it is being wonky. Again, my name is Zoe Trigget. I am a former Poudre High School student. Currently, I am a second-year student at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I am studying neuroscience, psychology, and integrated physiology, which is the pre-medical track here, with an additional minor in leadership via the President's Leadership class here. I have been awarded the Better Scholarship, which is a full ride scholarship to any institution in Colorado. And although this is not my entire identity, these accomplishments genuinely would not have been possible without the help of my school resource officer and former CU buff, might I add, Jared Sargent, who you heard from in the beginning. I met Sarge my junior year of high school, and I was asked by my guidance counselor to go with him to his office. In the walk there, I knew exactly what was going to happen, but that didn't stop me from feeling utter fear about how it was going to happen. 2 weeks prior, I had been violently raped by another Poudre High School student. And at that time, I had not come forward and genuinely did not have any plans to do so. However, after a doctor's appointment, it had been reported for me. And I walked into the office to see a police officer sitting at his desk waiting for me to sit down. Immediately, he greeted me with a soft and understanding tone. And he explained to me that when a rape report is made, they first go through him. And at the beginning, I was a little confused of why they would go through the school rather than the typical Fort Collins Police Department. But definitely looking back, I could not be more grateful. And that is why I was so excited when he asked me if I would be willing to share my story tonight. Even though I hadn't said anything, or even before I had walked in, Sarge had already figured out who it was, but he definitely maintained my wishes to not come fully forward yet. And thankfully he did so without judgment. In the months after, on top of reassuring that I was safe at school, he also allowed me to sit and cry in his office as much as I wanted to, and was an instrumental support through a miscarriage I had associated with the incident a couple months later. About a year later, when I was ready to come forward and press charges, he played an invaluable role of an intermediary step between me and what felt like the entire criminal justice system. He was able to translate all these big, scary words and roles and hearings into a language and concepts that my family and I could understand. I'm proud to say I was able to pursue justice against my rapist, and even more elated to inform you all that as of this Monday, I was additionally able to be successful in holding him accountable within that court system. And this was with the help of Bob Pursfield, who you also heard from tonight. And he did an immaculate job of doing so in a way that felt fair to me and brought me justice, but genuinely was restorative in nature for the defendant as well. The role of SROs and the role that they play that I feel like is genuinely underestimated is their ability to talk to teenagers. Their job revolves around helping young adults like myself through the criminal justice system. And this role is extremely important and must be considered when examining the presence of SROs in schools. I, as a citizen, am not unaware of the civil unrest going on in regards to police officers and why we need to have these tough conversations. But more training and more mentorship within this department would not hurt and possibly enhance the efficiency as a whole. However, at the same time, I do genuinely believe that simply getting rid of them would not be beneficial in the slightest. Without them, there is no lifeline between the general police or sheriff department in the town and the victim or the young adult that needs help. And in my personal experience, this was extremely helpful, as not everyone is typically trained to talk to teenagers themselves. So that definitely enhanced my experience in an unfortunate situation, and definitely made me feel more comfortable. With the support of Sarge, I was actually able to graduate in the top 2% of my class and earn a full ride scholarship. This coming from someone who swore I was going to drop out, felt like a miracle. And more importantly, he helped guide that track of feeling like a normal high school student again, which is oftentimes overlooked as something that SROs can do. Each year, it's really cool at Poudre High School, we are able to choose who hands us our diplomas during the ceremony, and my obvious choice was him. And there I actually had the pleasure of meeting another student who chose Sarge to hand her diploma to her. And as we sat through the ceremony practices and the ceremony itself, you know, those can be super, super long, we were actually able to get to know each other. And it was extremely evident that we came from very, very different walks of life. And additionally, it was clear that the role that Sarge played for her in her life was also very different. With the permission of her, clearly, I would like to take the time to acknowledge her story, as it is just as, if not more important than my own, especially in the context of tonight. And I feel very grateful that she has allowed me to share her story here. For the sake of her privacy, I'll refer to her as Annie. Annie told me all about her home life, and even within the small amount that she described, it was not, I would not be considered stable, unfortunately. And nearing the end of her story of how her high school experience went, I finally asked the question I'd been really wanting to ask the entire time, right? Why Sarge? Why is he handing her diploma as well? And when the words finally came out, she gave a little chuckle and she told me he had taken her to jail. And I'll admit I was a little shocked at first, and this was not something I had ever really thought I would hear from someone who decided that Sarge was going to hand her diploma. But the next part of the story is what definitely fascinated me. She explained how impactful Sarge was to her and how he had been able to help her get her back on her feet and out of the unfortunate situation that she had been placed in. In fact, she even told me she hugged him when he took her to jail. Again, I felt kind of shook by this statement, but in hindsight, I really shouldn't have been. You know, it's knowing who Sarge was and knowing his role in the school, it was definitely unfair of me to assume that anyone and everyone he held accountable for would automatically hate him, right? I feel like that's a very common misconception about police officers or SROs, especially within the criminal justice system. And I really admired her honesty, and I still do, with herself and her actions, but most of all, the successful path she has now created for herself moving forward, despite the path, and all which she still credits to Jared Sargent himself. And honestly, the biggest thing that I have gained from my conversation with her, and that I hope I've conveyed to those here tonight, was that Annie and I were both deeply, deeply impacted by our SROs in extremely formative, life-changing ways, despite the fact that my experience with Sarge was much more advocacy-based, while hers was much more restorative. And this results from that idea that I kind of mentioned earlier, that SROs are specifically able and trained to talk to teenagers in a way that reaches them and helps them. And that is ultimately, I feel like, what is invaluable to the success of students, her and I, differences and similarities alike. Thank you again, Michelle, for giving me this platform to speak on, and I'm happy to answer any questions about my story, and I can speak very, very limitedly about Annie's story, but moving forward, you're welcome to ask any questions.
Thank you so much, Zoe. Thank you for sharing your story with us tonight, and congratulations on the scholarships and your studies at CU. My dad is a Buff, so I was raised as a Buff, so go Buffs. That might make you cringe, but that's okay. And finally, our last panelist of the night is our Magistrate Zay. He's going to talk really briefly about a few of the other programs that were some people mentioned them but not explained, the GRC and the JRC, excuse me, and the CYDC. And so I'm going to have our magistrate tell us what those stand for, and you can go ahead.
All right, thank you. First of all, I appreciate Zoe's stories, and I feel a bit cheapish following that up with dry information about more programs. So thank you for sharing your story and the story of Annie here tonight. Programs I wanted to touch on, first one is CYDC. Those initials stand for the Colorado Youth Detention Continuum. The name is a bit of a misnomer because the word detention in there might make people think that this is an agency that's about detention, and it's actually about the exact opposite. The agency is about generating more solutions for keeping kids out of detention. And specifically, the kids who are in the court system, they've been charged, they have not yet concluded their case. They are either awaiting a trial, or they're awaiting a plea disposition and a sentencing. And the points between, and the time between those points when they were charged and when they resolve their case is when pretrial supervision can step in and provide the services that they offer. Services they offer basically include supervision. If there's risks and needs that need attention, CYDC can provide supervision that address those needs. For example, if location is an issue, if the youth has a tendency to leave home when they're not supposed to, or if the youth is involved in substances, the supervision could include monitoring of sobriety. In the location example, CYDC could provide electronic monitoring using electronic home monitoring or GPS devices. The CYDC is ordered to supervise by myself, usually at the request of a stakeholder like the DA's office. Oftentimes, if the DA is making recommendations for CYDC to supervise, it's based on information that was developed by diversion for youth who didn't succeed in diversion, and now their case is back, is officially in front of the court as a result. But any stakeholder can make a CYDC recommendation. Sometimes I get them from guardians ad litem. Sometimes I get them from the probation department if they have a prior acquaintanceship with the youth. Sometimes I might notice myself from information provided by other partner organizations. One we haven't covered much here, but is very much part of the process, is an organization called the Hub, which provides a lot of screening for youths who might be headed towards detention. Sometimes the information they provide would suggest CYDC is an appropriate agency to get involved. Services they provide include, they will arrange for youths to call in periodically to report how they're doing. They can provide monitoring of location, such as I've indicated, home lockdown, electronic home monitoring, or GPS monitoring. They can monitor sobriety. They can make referrals to a variety of services, and in fact, they've contracted with a lot of service providers to help sort of break down the red tape that might stand between families and services. They have contracts with providers that they can send kids to sort of overcome that red tape. Services such as treatment for mental health issues, specifically treatment for substance use issues. There's a whole pot of money that's devoted specifically for substance use issues that CYDC can access. Coaching and mentoring services they can make referrals to. They have partnerships with other organizations in the community that can supply those kinds of services. And the CYDC will provide reports to the court prior to each court appearance for youth they supervise. Those court reports have very valuable information for the court about how a youth is doing on supervision, information that is used by all the other stakeholders in trying to figure out how best to resolve a case, information used by me in deciding how to make decisions that affect the direction a case might take. The CYDC is not ordered in every case. We make a strenuous effort to be conscious of the idea that we don't want to overserve youths who don't need that kind of high level of service. But for kids who present with substantial risks and substantial needs, that's when we might ask pretrial supervision to come in. That's when we might ask CYDC to provide that pretrial supervision. The other agency I wanted to talk about is the Juvenile Recovery Court. This is a specialized program that's been around for about 20 years. When I served as a public defender in my old life, I was actually part of the original team that formulated the Juvenile Recovery Court as the public defender representative. And now, 20 years later, I'm presiding over the program as a judicial officer. This program is oriented towards youth with high needs and with high to medium risks of reoffending. And the primary risk that creates concerns regarding new offending comes from their relationship with substances, comes from the likelihood that they are experiencing substance use disorder. It's a problem-solving court. I'm not going to get too detailed into what that definition is, but it relies a lot on problem-solving court research to develop programming and responses. Basically, problem-solving court uses the court to closely monitor the administration of treatment and enhanced supervision services in an effort to keep the person's attention and focus on the treatment that's made available to them for the problem that the court is trying to serve. For the Juvenile Recovery Court, that is the juvenile's relationship with substances. That's the problem we're trying to focus the youth's attention on for the treatment. It's a multidisciplinary team participates in the program. Representatives from all of the agencies who are here today, Family Partnerships, CYDC, Probation. Bob Pursfield is a member of the team. Jared Sargent is a member of the team. We have schools involved in the team. This multidisciplinary team informs the court on the progress of youths and families in the program. They generate ideas for services. They generate ideas on responses that the court might take to how a youth is doing. And they communicate with each other regarding relevant information on how youths and families are doing, coordinate with each other on how to manage youths and families during the time between court appearances. The program model accounts for the likelihood that a youth might make mistakes during their participation in the program. The program is prepared to manage mistakes through a treatment and supervision framework rather than a framework that is about revocation and resentence. The youth appears in court frequently, and the court, with the assistance of the team, responds to how that youth is doing for the time period that the review is about, using sanctions if they are not doing well, if they're making mistakes, but also using incentives if they are doing well. Formal affirmative recognition of success is part of the program, and recognition in what we hope to accomplish is real time. In other words, we don't want to separate the response, whether it's positive or negative, from the behavior we're responding to. We don't want to separate. We don't want to put too much time between that. The incentives and sanctions that the court uses developed by the team through conversation prior to the court reviews. The program is also very much about the relationship that the youth has with the court and with the team members, the relationship that we develop with the families, because there are a lot of conversations occurring. If a youth is coming to court frequently to address how things went, that conversation has to be authentic feeling, and requires a genuine relationship to develop between myself and the youth, between myself and the family, between all of the various team members and the youth and the family. It's designed to be a phased program with youths promoting as they accomplish specific goals within the program, and hopefully graduating after they've successfully accomplished all of the goals of the program, accomplishing, and if they are progressing as we've structured the program, then they will be in the program for about 6 to 12 months. Youths are required to maintain at least 90 consecutive days sober before they can graduate. But otherwise, promotion between phases in the program is more driven by accomplishment of goals. Goals related to school, goals related to self, goals related to family, and goals related to the community. Sobriety as a measure of success is saved for the end of the program rather than the beginning.
Magistrate, this is Michelle. I apologize for interrupting, but we're running a little low on time. I just wanted to let you know.
Okay, I'm just about to wrap up. I wanted to pull up my notes again and finish up by stating the current system that we use today for this program is a top-down revision that we instituted when I came onto the program about 2 years ago to better conform the Juvenile Recovery Court to what we know works in juvenile justice and in problem-solving courts. We've had a lot of success with the revision. We've graduated a bunch of successful participants this year, and the youths who have graduated have accomplished their graduations within our planned time frame of 6 to 12 months. And that concludes my comments.
Thank you so much, Magistrate Zay, and thank you to all of our panelists. The stars are aligning a little bit tonight. Our panelists gave us a lot of good information this evening. I personally learned a lot. I'm sure most of our attendees are leaving tonight with a lot of new information to help serve our community. I currently don't have any open questions or individuals with their hands raised asked to ask a question. However, I know we had a few folks who sent in some questions earlier. And if you give me just a second, I would like to make sure that those questions were answered before we close up tonight. I believe one of the questions was, what's the process that a teacher goes through if they're going to refer a student to an SRO? I'm hoping one of my SROs will jump in and very, very quickly explain that process.
You're on mute.
Oh, Bobby, yep, you're on mute. There you are.
Again, forgive me. I'm so new to this, but at my school, I can't speak for Jared, but normally I work closely with the administration. And so the teacher, if the teacher has an issue or something along in the classroom, they would go through an administrator and start there. And then the administrator would make the decision whether they're going to involve me in whatever happened. Jared, do you have something different?
No, that's exactly how it works at Poudre High School and the schools that I've been in. Usually there's not a direct referral from a teacher to the SRO. It really goes through administration. Every now and then we might get called to a classroom, and oftentimes we might get a call that says, hey, a teacher needs somebody in this classroom, and we might follow the administrator if we don't really know what's going on in the classroom. But it was pretty rare that we would actually go into the classroom unless it was essential that we were in that classroom to help other students out. In other words, it was a crisis. But more times than not, these things they're usually going to go through administration. And even if we're called to a classroom, we might step out and just watch and see if it's something that we need to help out with or not, just to make sure everybody's safe. But the really standard operating procedure for us was to let administrators handle that first.
Thank you too for answering that question. The other questions that were sent in, I believe, were answered throughout presentations tonight. We had some questions about restorative justice that some of us spoke to. We also had a question about COVID and how things had changed for COVID. And we had some conversation about that already. So since I'm not seeing any other open questions, I would like to ask my panelists if there is any final words any of them want to say, if there's something maybe they forgot to mention that they'd like to get in there before we conclude for the evening. So
I'm sorry, may I say something about COVID?
Please go ahead.
COVID, one very important consequence of COVID is it has caused the state to be very conscious of the risks that are posed to youths who are in confined secure spaces. and the staff that supervise them. COVID and the response that they've taken is to basically require facilities to cut and jurisdictions to cut the capacity in half for beds for kids that jurisdictions may want to detain. Larimer County's capacity reduced from 14 to 7. It is, that reduction has caused all of the stakeholders here today to redouble their efforts to try to figure out how to create alternatives to detention for kids that present with circumstances we might have used detention previously for. And this jurisdiction has been very successful in detaining even fewer kids than that small cap would allow. Anywhere from 2 to 5 kids at any one time have been subject to detention, which is historically extremely low. So I wanted to point that out as a COVID consequence. You're on mute now.
You're here, Magistrate, to keep us in line. Any of our other panelists have anything to add before we close out? I am not seeing any takers. So with that, I want to address our attendees a little bit real quickly. Just a reminder, we have 2 more sessions of our criminal justice series in Larimer County. Next Tuesday and next Thursday is when those will be happening. And I also wanted to let you know that if you missed our series on Tuesday night, we talked about behavioral health in our co-responder program. That video is available, so you can check that out, and I'm going to send the link to you all right now to check out that video if you weren't able to make it. And with that, I want to thank you all for joining us on a Thursday evening for 2 hours. That says a lot to me and my panelists here, that you guys are engaged in our community, and you are the people that inspire us to get out of bed every morning, are these engaged citizens that really care about their community, and that everyone in their community is being provided with the services that they need to thrive and really excel in our community. So with that, we will move on to the part of the evening where we have an awkward Zoom goodbye, and all of us wave and say bye. So with that, thank you for being here. Good night.